Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the usage of GitHub Action in software development repositories. First, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about GitHub Action and what CI/CDs are, and then I'm going deeper on the usage of GitHub Action specifically in GitHub. My name is Puya Rostami. This works is a collaboration between me and my colleagues Alexander Dekan, Tom Menz, and Mehdi Golzadeh. I'm a PhD student at Software Engineering Lab Humans, and this work is accepted in ICSME 2022. So in order to understand the CI/CD, first we need to take a look at collaborative software development. Just consider that you have software projects that developers from all around the world are working on. So they make their changes and they submit these changes to the collaborative software platforms. In this case, GitHub. And after each of these changes, they want to make sure that everything's work fine. So they run series of tests and those tests make sure that everything is okay. They do some quality analysis, and if everything is okay, they merge those changes. And at some point in the development of the software, they deploy these changes for the final user. At some point, when they started to work in form of agile, they wanted to increase the pace. So they started using CI/CD. CI/CD are trying to automate these extra steps that developers need to take in order to make sure that the quality of software is great. And this is the place that CI/CDs like GitHub Action, Jenkins, Travis, and other CI/CDs come to play. Looking at the evolution of CI/CD usage, you can see that this work from summer 2022 studied 90,000 GitHub repositories, and it shows that Travis CI/CD used to be the dominant CI/CD in GitHub until the GitHub Action changed this, and GitHub Action became the dominant in less than 18 months after its introduction. And to better understand the reason behind this dominance, we conducted a series of interviews with different developers with different amount of experience, and the result was that the deep integration of GitHub Action with GitHub, ease of use of GitHub Action, the speed of this service, reliability, free tier for open source projects, large marketplace of reusable actions, and better support for major operating systems were some of the reasons why developers choose GitHub Actions over other CI/CDs in GitHub. Up until now, we talked about the GitHub Action, how it became dominant, and the reason behind this dominance. But what is GitHub Actions? What you should look for in software repositories in GitHub to see if they're using GitHub Action or not. So in order to use the GitHub Action, you need to create the subfolder of workflows. And in this subfolder, you would create series of YAML files. Each of these YAML files is known by the name of a workflow. These workflows are the tasks that developers want to create an automated version of those tasks for their development. For example, here you would see in the project Ignite, there are many different workflows. Some of them are like binaries nightly release.yaml file or docker build.yaml. And what is inside these YAML files? Well, you have a name for your workflow, and then you need to describe what are the events that trigger this workflow. For example, in this example, you would see the push, pull request, and a schedule. And after that, you create your jobs. You can have one or more than one jobs, and each of these jobs can have a name, and these jobs would have steps. Steps can be known with uses or run. If you use uses, you would indicate that you want to use a specific reusable component which is known as action. And if you use run, you would indicate that you would run a specific task in form of command in the VMware that is provided by GitHub for you. In the last slide, I talked about the actions as reusable components in GitHub action structure. You can find these actions in GitHub Marketplace. This is a place that developers use to publish their provided actions. As you can see here in the example, you would see a series of categories that it is there to make it easier for search. And then you have a specific search bar for it. And as a developer, you can choose to publish your action here or not. But in case that you don't publish it here, it's very hard for other people to find your provided actions, since they need to know your repository, your name, and that you provided these actions for other people to use. Having a little bit of background, now we can move on to our research and the research question that we answered in this work. We have studied many different aspects, which some of them are the characteristic of repositories using these workflows, the kind of workflows that are being automated, the most frequent jobs in workflows, the automation practices that is used in these workflows, and the type of the actions that are reused. As a first step to answer our research questions, we started to gathering information. In order to do this, we used CART GitHub search as an engine to gather all the repositories that we want, and we put some constraint and get the list of the repositories from this search engine. And the gather information is about 70,000 different repositories. Out of them, around 30,000 of these repositories are already using GitHub Action, and the information that we extracted is around 70,000 workflow files, 100,000 of jobs, and more than 500,000 of steps. At the first glance, we would see that more than 40% of the GitHub repositories that we gathered are already using the GitHub Actions and workflows. Deeper in the numbers, you would see that on average there is 2.4 workflows per repositories, and almost half of the repositories has only one workflow, and the other half has more than one workflow. This indicates that developers have different beliefs. Some of them believe that they only need one workflow for all of their tasks, and others believe that they need a separated workflow for separated tasks. And also it's related to how big or small your project is. And about jobs, you would see that on average in each workflow you would see 1.5 jobs. 77% of the workflows contain only one jobs, and only 22% of them have more than one jobs in their workflow. As a first step after data gathering, we decided to study the GHI usage per programming language, and as you can see on the left, the percentage of GHI usage in workflow with respect of the language shows that the Python is the most used language with GHI, and then JavaScript and TypeScript. This distribution is very similar to the distribution of most popular languages, programming languages in the world. And on the right, you would see the percentage of usage of GHI with respect to main repositories of programming languages. And if you go deep on this chart, you would see that TypeScript and Go has most usage of GHI with respect to their language, and this is because these languages are younger than others, and the developers who are working with these languages go for the GitHub Actions from the first, and mostly using this CI/CD and not other CI/CDs like Travis or other replacement of this CI/CD. Next, we check the different characteristics in repository to see if using GHA would have impact on any of these characteristics, and the results are that in the repositories with GHA, we tend to see 3 times more pull requests and 2 times more contributors, commits, and results. On top of these characteristics, we studied 6 other different characteristics like number of branches, age of project, and stars and others, which didn't indicate any specific difference. So we can understand that repos with GHA workflows tend to have more contributors, pull requests, commits, and issues. One important note about GitHub Action is that it can automate more tasks in comparison with other CI/CD tools that we used to have. So we look at the automation practices starting by the event types that can trigger the workflows, and what we found is that still the most frequent events are the one that you can usually find in the usual CI/CD tools. The most frequent events, as you can see in the table, are push and pull requests that are used by more than half of the repositories. And this is happening in a situation that in total there are 36 different events that you can use. And all these events can be found in GitHub Action documents. So we realize that although you have many different choices, still the events that is directly connected to the software collaborative development tools is being used by developers. One of the specific features of GitHub Actions is the ability to reuse actions in steps. So we decided to look at the steps to see to which extent developers are benefiting from these abilities. As you can see here, around half of the steps use an action, and nearly all repositories have at least one step referring to an actions. We observe that these steps mostly refer to another public repository, just as I mentioned earlier, from Marketplace, which are 48% of the steps, which are distributed over almost all the repositories, 99% of the repositories. So what we understand is that reusing actions in steps is a common practice. The next concept that we studied is the category of the actions that are being reused. If you remember in the marketplace example, you will see that there are around 20 different categories of action that you can use. And we studied the categories that we found in the repositories of our dataset, and we realized that 88% of the steps which are distributed over 99.4% of the repositories are using the actions from the category of utility. This shows that the utilities category is the catch-all category that whenever developers can't come up with a specific category, they just decide to use the utilities. But after that, you would see the most used categories are continuous integration, publishing, deployment, and code quality. Still, these categories are mostly related with the basic old school CI/CD that developers need to use in their projects. Next, we decided to find out which actions are the most reused ones by the developers. By looking at our data, we realized that the most important actions is the action checkout, and this is because developers use this action to do a git clone in the provided VM to start other tasks. And as you can see in the table, action checkout is responsible for 35% of all the steps in our dataset, distributed over 98% of the repositories. Next, you would see that around 65% of all the steps are covered by these top 5 actions. So most of the reuse has been done using these actions that you can see here. And you can't find any third-party action provider until the 9th and the 10th place between most used actions. And the last thing is that around setup, any actions related to setup would cover 25% of the all steps of action usage. And by setup, we mean that setup Node, setup Python, setup Java. And also we understand that a few action concentrate most of the reuse, and most of them being developed by GitHub team, and the third party still have a long way to go. There are many more quantitative results in the paper which you can check for the further information from the link below. But now I want to introduce the GitHub Action ecosystems, one of the aspects of GitHub Actions which make it quite unique in the face of other CI/CD tools. The way that GitHub Action provider decided to add these reusable components that we know as actions, it creates a GitHub Action ecosystem. This ecosystem has many similarities with software packaging ecosystem that we already know, like NPM, PyPy, and Cargo. And also it is exposed to and already suffering from the similar issues to other ecosystem which needs more studies. In form of growth and evolution that we would see in this ecosystem, we have a steady dose of the growth and evolution in the number of the repositories that are using these reusable components, and also in the number of the actions that is provided to the users. And some of the problems that is already existing in this ecosystem is like outdatedness. At least 16% of the steps are referring to an older major actions. And also there is a concept of breaking changes, because around 90% of the workflows assume semantic version for reusable components. And this semantic version means that whenever you have a major update, you would face a problem of breaking changes. You have also security issues, dependency issues, abandonment, and quality problems. In this slide, you can see a schema of our proposed GitHub Action ecosystem and how different components work with each other. You can see that the software repositories will use workflows which rely on action. Action themselves would be developed in some other software repositories, and more interestingly, even other packaging ecosystem would be connected to this ecosystem as long as they use workflows in order to develop their programs. This means that the problems in GitHub Action ecosystem can propagate to other ecosystems and create problems for them. We have created the base for further study in different aspects of this ecosystem. You are welcome to conduct further studies by yourself or contacting us for further collaboration.